Welcome to the Event Debrief, the podcast where event professionals come together to unpack what really makes events work. Each episode breaks down expert-led debriefs, emerging tech, and industry insights to help you deliver more effortless events. So, let's jump in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Event Debrief. My name is Alex, and we're excited to be joined by another terrific guest on another topic I'm also very excited to dive into. We've had a series so far of things like AI in events and how to improve events by 1% and looking at simple applications to improve your events. Today, we're sort of changing the conversation slightly, and we're going to be challenging some norms that we feel probably need to be challenged for the better. And I'm very excited because the guest we have today is probably the perfect person to share some insights and thoughts and feedback on this topic. So the topic today is Death of the Annual Conference, and I'm very excited by a guest who's joining us today, who is probably the perfect person to unpack this with us. This is Rob Eveleigh from Brightelm, who is an event expert and has tons of really great insights to share on this topic. So I might hand over to you, Rob. Maybe we start with maybe a quick introduction to people who don't know you, your experience in events, and maybe a little bit about the organization you come from.
Thanks so much, Alex. It's a delight to be here this morning. Whenever I get asked a question now, I'm at the age where I like to forget how many years I've been doing this for, because it just ages me. I've got a big birthday coming up at the end of the month. So could I just say I've been doing this for a while. And actually, my career has had lots of iterations. So it's always been events based, but I've been on hotel side, I've been sales side, and in-house and agency side too. And for the past 12 years, actually longer than that now, 14 years, I've really specialized in working with associations. And that's what I built Brightelm with a view to exclusively supporting associations on running their events. Now that's now turning into helping associations develop and grow their events. So currently our tagline is the agency, the event agency for associations, and that's going to change over the next year or so as we talk more about helping associations grow and develop. And that's really where the topic or the headline, that attention grabbing tabloid style headline, the death of the annual conference, comes from, because it's not saying that the annual conference should cease to exist at all. What it's saying is that probably your annual conference, if it hasn't modified or changed or really evolved at all in the past 10 years, it is in danger of failing. They may not see it at the moment, but you'll probably, if you look under the bonnet with your measurement and statistics, you might find it's taking longer to get people to register. Maybe there's no one out there as your ambassador talking about the event in the industry. Maybe your registrations of a particular type are starting to drop off. Maybe it's getting harder to get sponsors and exhibitors there. So there's potentially little signs you can look for to see, actually, is what we're doing still relevant. But I think people, and the other part of this is that as consumers of events, delegates have moved on. So we're very firmly post-pandemic until the next one comes, of course. So we're very firmly post-pandemic. In a post-pandemic world, the vast majority of us are working probably in hybrid roles. Some associations in the UK, because they're small teams and to cut costs, work remotely completely. And their members are working remotely. So the importance of human connection, is growing and growing and growing. So there's certainly a need for events, but there's also there's now a competitive event market.
When we say with the annual conference, you named on a few areas there. Maybe if we name and shame, we say by the annual conference, can you sort of break that down of what in particular do you currently see dying at the moment?
Okay, I think format is the most important, is the first thing to address.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps we need to consider the idea that whilst we've been talking that content is king, or using this mantra, which I researched actually, it's from a magazine back in the 70s. Content is king. That's where this phrase came from, and it's been applied to events. Content is still important. Content will get sign off for people attending a conference, so the program has to be really, really good. But experience is becoming, in my opinion, experience is becoming more and more of a deciding factor as to whether someone will attend an event or not, whether they will take the time out, and whether it's worth it for them. That's the thing. If it is the whole thing worth it to them? They have a bad experience, they won't come back. But talking about the content model, many conferences are still following a plenary, oral presentation, exhibition break, oral presentation, cheese and wine party in the evening, plenary, mini symposium, mini symposia, wrap up plenary, and go home. So that's a very, very oversimplified version of a 2-day congress. And the problem with that is it's not considering people's different learning styles. It's not considering that actually we now have the technology to be able to circulate a lot of content in advance of a conference. We no longer need to go to that conference to hear that, to read that poster. It can be published in advance. The abstract, the paper can be published in advance. We can probably see that speaker somewhere in advance. So we really need to think about how does that impact our program. Surely then the value in bringing people together is to discuss the topic rather than be presented in a one-to-many format. Of course, there's lots of different ways you can do that too.
Absolutely. And I was going to say that was I just took a few notes as you were talking then too. So the traditional way of doing it is about the fact that events had an exclusivity somewhat to the content or to the people they're interacting with. Now it's sort of more readily available, and it's not just delivering the content, it's how you deliver it and how people are going to interact. And I totally agree. We survey hundreds of event planners every year, and the same thing we keep hearing: in-person events are growing more and more popularity as we go on. We thought it was going to be the end of it during COVID, but people now more than ever just desperately need a connection and that human interaction. So I completely agree. Experience is overtaking attendance, or just the standard way of doing conferences, I guess. Great. Okay. So you were saying the engagement's gone down, things get more expensive. People sort of, it's not enough to engage the attendee anymore. If we look at where you see, and I'll say this from your opinion because we wish we were fortune tellers, but we're not. Where do you see it going? I guess in your experience, you're noticing a lot of these trends. We spoke recently, you had some really interesting points about hyper-personalisation, the session problem with heavy monotone talking. Could you sort of draw us a picture of where you see this going if the old way is dead?
Okay, yes. Let's do some futurology. Do not call myself a futurologist, but by the way, but just thinking about how these formats might evolve. We spoke about hyper-personalisation. Now that's a subject that's been coming up a fair amount recently, and it's really about what we mean by hyper-personalisation is trying to make the event as relevant to the individual as possible. Technology, particularly AI, has the power to be able to do that quite effectively now. You can over hyper-personalise. I think I've just made that word up, but
Sounds good.
and you can go too far with it. But it's really hyper-personalisation is really about, like I said, just creating or indicating a potential experience for a delegate they might really appreciate based on the data that you hold about them. So that's one thing. I think the importance of creating connection is probably something we should talk about, because in the events industry, we're really bad at facilitating networking, like super poor at it. We're talking about professionalizing our industry. We're no longer the people in events that just do. We are thinkers. We're strategists. But putting a group of people in a loud, dark room with a low ceiling and giving them cheese and wine at the end of a conference is not conducive for networking. It's conducive for having shouting matches with people you know already. But in terms of creating additional value for your delegates and trying to maximize their experience, to most people that is a nightmare scenario. So, and it's a nightmare for many different reasons. Let's talk about dietaries. Cheese and wine party is very uninclusive now for many people. If you don't drink alcohol, and more people choose not to drink, particularly entry level generations are choosing not to drink at work. Cheese party, and I have a client a couple of years ago who absolutely flatly refused to move away from their cheese and wine party as a part of the reception. See, if you have a dairy intolerance, you're not going to go. If you don't eat dairy, you're not going to go. And it's a very the same with the word cocktail. It sends the wrong impression. If you talk about networking in terms of we're going to help you meet together, or socializing for work is another term you can use. Okay, it doesn't quite trip off the tongue so well. It's about how you position that so it's a benefit to members, as opposed to just people going in a room and chatting to people they know already, which does have its benefit. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen, but a lot of people, for many reasons, would find that an absolute nightmare.
Absolutely. And I think you had always love giving examples where it's appropriate. You mentioned a really interesting one a little while back around having someone almost like a host that comes in and connects people to the right ones. Like I think you mentioned that networking is not just maybe outdated, and you made a great point. Less and less people are drinking, and they don't want cheese in certain cases. But you mentioned that overall it's anxiety inducing. People don't want to go there for people they don't know by themselves and put themselves on the spot. Did you have that example you mentioned of someone coming in helping to piece those connections, which probably plays into the hyper-personalization point as well?
Yes, I can. And actually, we run our own community as well called Evolve, which is for in-house association event professionals. And we had our conference called Evolve Live. We don't call it the annual conference because that's called eating your hat, I think. And actually, at a number of points during the day, we had a team in place from the Professional Association of Networking to help people meet each other. So on arrival, their team were in place. They were easily identifiable, and they were there just to make sure that no one felt alone. And that's really important. Going to a new event for the first time when you don't know anyone, it can be the most daunting thing. And then we also had some facilitated knowledge exchange. So at the beginning of the afternoon, people sat in tables in the main session and swapped stories with each other about what they'd learned from that morning, their key learning points. But what a great thing to do! Because as a delegate, you can't go to everything. It's not possible. So actually, why not use an opportunity to share some of the key takeaways with others? So that's what I mean. It's about in an unobtrusive way as possible, just being there to help people get the most of it. And when we talk about networking, a lot of people consider that the place of the salesperson, and they dread it because you've got someone coming up to them that in their worst nightmare, they've got someone who hasn't been trained properly in how to network for sales, coming up to them, qualifying them in an opening conversation and pitching them their business. Certainly in the UK, that's a put off straight away. So actually, networking isn't about the pitch. It's not about being the receiver of that pitch. It's about generally making connections and seeing how we can help each other.
Absolutely. And I think even, yeah, it's a good point. Even if you are a sponsor or an exhibitor, and maybe your core reason for be there is to promote and do those things, I think it's sort of a works against you in that sense if you're there just to pitch and you're going to put people offside, and it ends badly for everyone. So that's a great point of trying to find, I guess, who they are, and if they're especially by themselves, connecting them to the right people to have a really great networking session.
Yeah.
I want to jump to on. You had a really. There's two other points I wanted to get into. You had a really uh, great explanation on the idea of the session problem, and you mentioned about having super slide heavy, monotone talks from experts, which again is something that I'm picturing a few that I've been to myself, that come with all the right intentions. We want to hear from experts in the industry, and on paper it sounds great, but it's just not working. And you had a different way of approaching that with content you mentioned at the start, and maybe approaching QA in another way.
Well, I think first of all, there's always the opportunity to there's always opportunity to switch up a session. So if you've got the technology and the ability to publish content in advance, why not have a presentation, limit it to 5 minutes out of your 20 minutes, and use 5 minutes as the presentation, but then 15 minutes as a Q&A and discussion. That's more valuable to both the audience and the presenter. 5 minutes Q&A is never enough for if we're talking about scientific papers now, for example. 5 minutes Q&A is never enough to get under the skin of a discussion. We run webinars for our community. And I might get through one or two questions in 5 minutes. If you're presenting the culmination of years and years of research, surely that's worth more than one or two questions. So there's that opportunity to maybe just present summary findings if you need to present at all, but then use the time for discussion and in a very kind way challenging the research or having ideas about how that research could be developed next. That's one idea. The other is that the content doesn't always have to be about presentation. A lot of the time people come to events, I was saying before, about they want to network. And the reason they want to network is they need ideas about how to solve problems. That's one of the motivators. So why not build that into your content program? Build in roundtable sessions, workshops, training. Go over and above the traditional content of the program and think about actually what do these attendees really need to help them do their jobs. And often the supply chain can help with that as well. If you speak to your sponsors and exhibitors and which is a paid for opportunity, obviously, the really good ones will come up with sessions which really help and provide value to the attendees without pitching.
Absolutely.
I don't personally have a problem with a sponsored session having a small pitch in it. I think that's fine. But the whole session can't be about a pitch. You've got to really, and it's got to be at the end, because if you're going to deliver, you've got to deliver value and get people's appreciation before you go in at the end and say, great, okay, now if you'd like to know more about our product, here's a QR code you can click on, et cetera, et cetera. Very light like that. But some sponsors are becoming very, very good at providing well thought out, balanced content.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, sorry.
So there are so many more different formats you can consider in a program, rather than the one to many broadcast 20-minute plus 5 session.
Yes. And I think as far as a takeaway for me is that preloading of that content. If it's a technical side of things, and as you said, some of these discussions I've heard 100 times, and having even uploading videos or recordings or things they can access prior to the event or pre readings. And then, as you said, like maybe making half or most of the agenda of the session or a Q&A. Because even to your point, when I think about the best events I've been to, it is the Q&A. It's really people challenging points, and then they challenge that point, and then it goes around the room, and there's never enough time for a good topic. It always seems to have to like cut off early. Which is also another one too you mentioned of the downfall of tying it back to the topic of the annual conference, the agreeable agenda trap. And I know that's not a buzzword, but I'm really liking that. So I made sure I wrote that down. And that you're saying it plays into we want to bring what's currently topical in the industry if you're doing an industry association event, but sometimes we're preaching to the choir, which sounds warm and fuzzy. But
Very much so.
You're saying the same thing, as opposed to, as you said, sort of challenge it. Can you maybe the agreeable agenda trap? Could you unpack that a little bit more?
I think what this is about is it's scientific congresses and perhaps medical congresses that sometimes, less so medical, actually, more scientific congresses which are guilty of this, is that you're bringing a community of scientists together to share their work with other scientists. For the main purpose of that is a peer review, but then it doesn't go anywhere. So if you want any part of that research to be applied anywhere, it needs to go somewhere outside of that choir, if you like, and that's the challenge with some of these events. And that's why I say it's like preaching to the choir, is that you've got all this great work going on, but it never goes anywhere. It gets talked about in the community. And if you think about the challenge of what many scientists have, is they have a challenge of how to further their idea, how to take it further, how to apply it in real world, and who they need to speak to make that happen.
Absolutely.
And that's an opportunity for a conference, a session.
And I think too, as you said, if you've got a room of experts there, and part of scientific investigation is to have people question it and sort of dive into it. And I think even for the speaker, it's more valuable to hear those questions and feedback. Great. I think I'm cautious. There's so many more, but I'll make sure not to go too much further on. There was, I guess, the last 2 points were, if we say, and people listening say, "Yep, I totally agree. The annual conference is dead. Here's this new hyper-personalisation QA agendas. We're going to change everything." I guess, how do we then measure it? I know traditionally, and the boring way was attendees and sort of revenue, but when we say experience is now the most important thing, what's your thoughts on, I guess, how do we now measure that to know it's working? We make all these changes to see if it's getting better on the other end.
I mean, there are so many data points available to us now. So many, it's hard to count them sometimes. But whether that's from interactions with your tech, maybe that's down to the number of questions which are asked in a session, the number of people that attend each session, measuring sentiment on exit from a session. How do you feel about that session? As I was having a discussion with a scientist about this yesterday, and he's very empirical based. He's a very empirically based science. There's no good measuring sentiment. We want facts and figures. And I said, yes, but sentiment is important, because actually part of the transformation, an event should be a transformation, right? You go in one end, and you go in one end not knowing something or not being connected to something, and you exit with more knowledge or with more connections. So measuring sentiment is an important part of the evaluation mix, I would say too. So we've got all these tools where we can measure interaction points on the app, number of people that connect, number of connections that were made, number of exhibitor leads. I mean, that's a very important measurement part as well. So there are so many ways we can evaluate now, and evaluate change as well. So measuring measuring a sentiment or measuring an understanding of a topic on entry to the conference or event, and then measuring it again on exit, and seeing what that changes. And then reconversion, I guess, too. So that's reconversion. That's when you've got someone who's coming to who's attended the event, and then comes again and again and again.
Yep, absolutely.
That's a really important measure too, because if you have created the best events, the same people will come back year in, year out, year in, year out. Now there'll be variations in rotation, where depending on where you're running the conference to. We all know that, but you'll have a core of people that come every year. The stronger that core, the more people that are in that core, the more people they will bring with them.
Absolutely, and I agree. I think it's old-fashioned, but how did you hear about this event, or those sorts of ones? And I think referral and reoccurring, I think, is always the strongest. That word of mouth, nothing will ever beat that, in my opinion. Particularly now when everything is so automated and digital. I think having that word of mouth is super important.
I think it's more than super important. I think it's essential. So in an increasingly digital world, we are now desensitized to digital messages. And there are various statistics bandied about how many impressions it needs to take to get someone to buy now. But some people say it's like 13 or 14 different buying signals on average to get someone to buy.
Yes. I think there was one a company called Dream Data, and I think year on year it is increasing. They said one in certain industries, not all of them, but in B2B it's something like 62 now, which is from a digital perspective, and something that plays positively in our industry, which is great for us, is events. Accounts for multiple touch points. So they say you can have 62 different digital touch points, or if they attend one or two events, that engagement, that experience is worth so much more than all these other digital points. It's having that human connection builds that trust, as you said, and gets a different discussion, and it gets them sort of thinking and coming back for more. Great. Also, I'm just cautious of time. I've got one last question here, and it's probably a pretty hard one, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. For those who've heard this and agree with it and like some of these points, how should they get started if they're sort of, let's just say, worst case, they're doing exactly what you've described as the traditional event that's dying? What would be your advice? What would be the first things that you think they should start doing or start considering?
I think start measuring, first of all. So have a look at what the data you have and analyze that, and understand from that data what you can tell what is working and what isn't. I think once you understand what the there's no point in diagnosing something unless we understand what the problem is. Once you've got that, think about a 3 to 4 year strategy. So what do you want your event to look like in 4 years time? What's the optimum? Although bearing in mind the rate of change at the moment, by the time you get to that 4 years, your event may need to change it again, but you just go through that process again. So think about your future point in time, what you want your event to look at, and then build a roadmap of change. Associations struggle with change, not generally because of member bodies, because they are member bodies, and members generally restrict change quite a lot. They're generally resistant to change because it means something which is precious to them might go out of control, might suddenly be no longer precious to them. So I understand why that is. So plan in change slowly. Think about changing a few different things each year. Start adding in different types of format. Don't change whatever you do, don't change everything straight away, because you will then just alienate everybody. But start thinking about, okay, is the name right? If the name isn't right to describe the event anymore, let's change it, but let's plan when that change is going to take place. Let's start pulling in some workshop sessions on this topic, because it looks like this is an important topic to our members from this piece of research which has been done. Look outside of your organization too. So as an association staff, you're responsible for leading that profession. Leading that profession doesn't mean that you have to be led by what members think about certain things. Sometimes you need to go outside of that profession or understand outside of the membership to really understand the wider profession. I think that's important too. So I think that's what I would say, just to recap. Understand where you are, understand what the problem is that you've got to solve, create your destination in a couple of years' time, and then work out a change plan to get there.
Perfect. No, that's great. And I totally agree. Start measuring, because we can't change what you don't measure. And I think, and to your point, if you implement 6 things at once, and it does work, and you don't know which of the 6 worked, if things go up, then we have to try and find bit by bit what's actually going to work and and what's not. Fantastic. I might leave it there, Rob. Thank you so much. That was great. And I guess for people, like I said, who don't know you, I guess if they want to know more or reach out to you guys and sort of learn more, where can they find you, and as well as evolve the community you have at the moment as well?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn. Is the best way to get in contact with me. I've been told I'm prolific. We'll see. You be the judge of that. To find out more about Brightelm, best avenue is our website, which is brightelm.co.uk. And then the Evolve, to find out more about the Evolve community, which is the community for in-house association event professionals. It's the evolvecommunity.org. I'm just looking to my colleague now, who's just said, yes, that's it. That's the one.
That's the right one. Fantastic. All right, I'll include those links as well for those on the page. And fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate your time, and all the best. And I hope to chat again soon.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.